YouTube. Today we're going to go over a puzzle problem that's called Queen's 8, which means you put 8 queens on the chessboard and do not have them attack each other. This includes diagonals as well, as across them sideways and up and down. You can read more about it on this Wikipedia page. It's a good recursion problem for beginner CS students, or just if you want to practice recursion. So we're going to be coding this in Eclipse and Java. So step 1 is to head over to Eclipse, create a new project. I'm going to call this Queen's 8 2 because I already have it, or Queen's 8 2. That won't. It doesn't matter. So go into your project, right click, create a new class. This is going to be the main class. So we want a main method with it so we can execute our code. And also for our actual Queen's 8 problem, I'm going to create another class. And this class is going to be called chessboard. We do not need a main method for this because we'll be creating a chessboard inside of this main class. So let's make sure everything works just by doing a system.out. System, that's what I didn't spell it right. .out.println hello world. Run that, see what it gets. There it goes, outputs hello world, which means it's working. So let's over a chessboard. The first thing you do when you create a new object is you need a constructor. So to write constructor, you declare it either public or private, and then the name of the constructor, which for this is going to be called chessboard. And we don't need any parameters. It's going to be default 8x8. If you want to do a different size of chessboard, you can give it an integer like int size, and then you can do like 10 queens on 10x10 chessboard. But we're just going to do the standard 8x8 because that's what chessboard is. So inside this chessboard, this constructor, we're going to need to initialize our variables, but we don't have any yet. So our chessboard is going to be a 2D integer array. And always make your variables in objects private, so they cannot be directly accessed by whoever creates an object. It's just for security reasons. You can create your getters and setters so you can modify them yourself, but it's just if you're ever taking like an AP CS class or study computer science, these always have to be private. They're called fields, by the way, I think. We're going to have 2 variables. One's going to be a 2D integer array, which means it has 2 brackets. And the second one is going to be called the num queens, and that's going to be the number of queens we currently have on the board when we go through the algorithm and gradually place queens down, check to make sure they're okay. So when we initialize or create our constructor, we're going to need to initialize these 2 fields. So num queens, when we start, there's going to be no queens on the board. So just set that equal to 0. Board has to be actually initialized. So board is equal to new int, and then it's going to be inside these brackets. It's going to be 8, then another 8. So that's an 8x8 2D array. Now initially, what this does is it creates an 8x8 array and it fills them with zeros. But just for practice, I'm going to create a loop, and j is equal to 0. J is less than a j plus plus. It's going to be a double nested loop. And then I'm going to go through every single spot in this array and fill it with 0. It's already done. This is kind of inefficient, but it's good when you learn how to code, that you learn to initialize everything in your code equal to 0, or reset everything to make sure it exists. Now, we're going to need I'm going to write some getter methods. First one's going to be called get num queens. I'm going to write all the headers to all the methods we're going to need to write. This is a really good practice whenever you're coding something. Just plan everything out before you actually start coding. So I'm going to have a solve method, or start method, public void start, which means it's not going to return anything. You don't need to have a return statement there. And then I'm going to have a solve method. It's going to be a boolean return. It's going to take an integer and it's going to take num queens. This is where recursion comes in. So every time we call recursion, it's going to give it another its current status on the number of queens. Now, I'll explain more of that later. Now we're going to have a public static. Static means there's only going to be one instance of this method called valid move. It's going to take in two parameters, an x and a y, and just return 0 at the moment. Get num queens, which we already did. Place queen. It's going to return an integer. It's going to take in 3 integers as well, x, y, and type. And type is going to be whether it's you're placing the queen down or taking one up. So I'm going to return 0 at the moment. And then our last method is going to be print board. And that's not going to return anything at the moment. So let's head over to our main method and get everything coded up so we can just run it at any time and see where we're at. So let's create a chessboard object. Chessboard board, let's call it board. Let's equal to new chessboard. Remember, our constructor didn't have any parameters, so it's going to be blank in here. There's going to be nothing in those parentheses. And then we're going to call the start method. And start requires no parameters, so that's going to be just blank. So let's head over to print board. Let's get this knocked out of the way, because seeing what we're building is usually pretty nice. So it's going to be 2 nested loops again. J is less than 8. Why we do less than 8, not equal to 8, is because in computer science, when you count variables, you start at 0 instead of 1. So it's always 1 less. So if you're trying to loop to 8, you go less than 8. So it stops at 7. So it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which in total is 8. That took me a while to get around my head when I was first learning how to code. Alright, your second variable is going to be k, or it can be whatever. It doesn't have to be j or k. It can be whatever you choose. Less than 8, k plus plus. Alright, so now it goes through every horizontal. What this loop is doing is it goes through every j value, and then it goes through every column. I think it's going to be it's going to go across, and then every time it goes down, or it goes down, and then it goes across. I don't think it really matters, as long as you get every single space. So we're going to print out this.get j and k plus a space. The space is just for formatting. It's not really necessary. And then after you finish printing out an entire line, you're going to do system.out.println, print line, and that's going to move it down to another line. And get, do we have get placed yet? I don't think we do. I think we forgot that one. So I forgot a method. It's going to be public static int get. It's going to take in an x variable and a y variable. They're both going to be integers. And I'm going to return the board at those coordinates. So each, we're going to have integers representing random parts of the board. So if a board has the spot 0, it's going to be empty. If it has a spot 1, it's going to be a queen. So you'll see that later when we start executing the code. So now we're going to go into get, and now that we return those values, I also want to check to make sure the values are legal. So I'm going to throw in a checker, or an if statement. If x is less than 0, or as y is less than 0. The OR statement is just two, it's the button above the enter. It's just 2 solid lines. Rather than and is located at the 7. We're not using and. So let's do or x is less than 7, or y is greater than 7. This is going to be 7, not 8, because remember when you count, it goes to 1 less than the one you're trying to intend to. So if none of these values are true, or if one of these values is not true, I'm going to return -1, which means it's not valid. and I'm going to throw in a system.out.println just to let us know that something's wrong. Say something's wrong, you get, and then you can go and debug and find out what went wrong. Now, next method we're going to do is called place queen. It's going to place a queen at this integer, or it's going to remove a queen if the type is not, if it's not 0. So let's do if type equals 0 for x at that position, which is xy, is going to be equal to 1. And then we're going to increment num queens by doing plus plus. That means take the value of num queens and add another one to it. And we're going to return 0. Now, if type is equal to 1, board x, y is equal to 0, and return 0. So we're resetting the board if it's equal to 1. That means we're going backwards in our recursion. And if our code should never go beyond this point, it should either be as type 0, 1, or if it does go beyond it, print wrong type, and we still need to return something. Should return -3. The reason why this is highlighted now, or this was highlighted a second ago, is it's possible still to get to the end of the code and not return anything, which is not legal in Java. So you always have to return something in every single case. Now this code should never be called, but just in case it is, we have something there. That's what I was complaining about. So get num queens. This should just return this private variable, or this private field. So just return num queens, and that should solve that one. Is valid move. This one's gonna be a little tricky. This is you're gonna need to check the x, check the y, and check the diagonal. So checking the x and y are actually really simple. We can do it with one for loop. Just do j is equal to 0, j is less than 8, j plus plus, just to loop through 0 through 8. Now you can do if get x, j is equal to 1, return -1. That means return that this move is not valid. You can do return false, but it's just slightly less efficient because false is like a different kind of variable. Else if get j, y. This is so you don't have to do 2 different loops. This is just to make it slightly more efficient, which running this program should take milliseconds, so it's not much of a big deal. So if there's something on the y, we should also return -1. Now we're going to check the diagonals. Check diag. So for int j is equal to 0, j is less than 8, j plus plus. Another for loop. Now this is where it gets a little tricky. So now we're going to write an if get x minus j, or y minus j, equals 1. And this is where these bounds come into play. So where were we? Up here. Alright, so if these values equal 1, return -1. Another if statement, if get x minus j. This is not an else if, keep that in mind, because if it were an else if, we'd get knocked out of the loop if the other one was true. So we're going to return -1 here. Another if statement, get x plus j. Just make sure you have a minus, 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 plus, plus, minus, plus, plus, and you should be good. And then y minus j. You don't need spaces. You can also do copy and paste. It's not a big deal. but a lot of people don't like you copying code because then you don't really learn it. X plus j, then y plus j, lowercase j. Return -1 as well. Else, return 0. Which means, if it returns 0, it's fine. That means it passed all these tests. Alright, so now that we have diagonal done, let's get to the start. So, when we first start the method, we're going to have 0 queens. So let's start, we're going to call the solve method with 0. And, so LB, why is this not working? Method solve is undefined for type chessboard. So, I spelled it wrong, that's why. There we go. Alright, so now we just have to write a solve method, then we are finished. So the biggest thing about using recursion is you need a test, you need a point where the recursion should stop, and that should be the first point in the code. So we're going to stop if we have 8 queens on the board. So if we're done the loop, if we're done with this recursion, I'm just going to say done. That should finish it. And then this dot print board, which means this chessboard object is going to call the printboard method on itself, so it should print itself. Which means we should see where we're at, and then we're also going to return true. Alright, so now if we're not finished and we have a lot more to go, we have an else statement to knock out. So we're going to have 2 nested loops to go through every spot on the board, checking for valid spots. J is less than 8, J++. You're going to be running a lot of loops in this program if you haven't realized that yet. Q0, 8, K++. Alright, so now we're going to have an if statement. So if the current spot it's looking at is a valid move, which is JK currently within the loop, it's going to, well, if it equals 0, which means it's valid, it's going to place a queen at that spot, at J, K, 0. 0 means place queen, 1 means remove. Just don't forget that. Also, another quick tip, if you do *// this is how you do JavaDoc. I highly recommend it, even though we're not doing it yet. You do it either when you write out your methods for the first time, just so when you call the methods it tells you what it needs. It's good practice, but I usually get lazy. We're going to increment num queens, and then if solve num queens, we're going to be returning true here, else this dot place queen J, K, 1. So this means if the solve method, if you can't solve it if in the future it does not return true, which means it's false, which we need to remove the queen at this location and decrement num queens. I think that's more or less it. Then we need to return false down here. So if it can't find a good spot for it, so what's going on? Part of recursion is right here. So if you can solve the puzzle right here, which means if there's a solution in the future, it's going to return true. If it doesn't, if it goes through the loop and it calls this method again, the solve method, and it runs through everything, and it finds a solution, if it keeps going, keeps returning true until this is 8, it's done, it's completed. But it's not, because 8 queens doesn't run that way. So eventually it's going to run through and run out of valid moves, so it's going to return false. It's going to run down here and find the false method. So it's going to go back, and this method is not going to be true anymore for that specific spot. And it's going to return false, so you can go into this else statement and move that current frame of the recursion down a level, down the next K or the next J, until it returns true again. And then once it returns true, it's going to keep going through until it returns false or has 8 queens. So now if we execute this main method, something went wrong in get, which means I made a mistake somewhere. So let's go check out get. I am accessing. Actually, I wonder what would happen if I counted this out. There we go. Here's our solution. Weird. JK. Alright, I think I'm going through my loop backwards. Because it's definitely coming out with a solution, it's just I'm printing it after. There it is. This should be a print, not print line. There we go. So this is our solution for 8 queens. Print does not print a new line, by the way. That's what went wrong there, whereas print line does. This is now your chessboard. This for an 8x8 chessboard, this would be, every one would be a queen. This would be the solution 8 queens. Now, what I challenge you guys to do is to store the solution, and you could probably throw it in an array list. Like, this would be inside main, so if you did like an array list of chessboard, and store that solution, and then keep going through this algorithm, and keep calling this solve method until you get all the possible solutions for every chessboard for 8 queens. I think there's more than one. I haven't really looked into too much detail about this, but to find every single solution and print it out, that would be a challenge for you guys. Other than that, that sums it up. Don't forget your comment your code. I didn't hear, but I'll teach you guys another tutorial how to do that. But other than that, thanks for watching. Check out my site for updates. It's still pretty bare bones. I have a blog going on that's kind of embarrassing. There's going to be updates to that soon. I have my Twitter account up and running. I'm going to be doing live streams soon, hopefully. I just need to get that set up, get a cam set up, get stuff to work on. And that's about it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next video.